If you are a college student, whether it be undergrad or graduate school, writing a research paper or a thesis or a dissertation requires that you learn how to utilize peer-reviewed journals. So, problem number one sometimes is even finding articles, but let's say that's not your issue. You have access to PubMed and you have access to a library where journals are cataloged, or someone has given you a copy of a journal article. And so you've read through the article and you found some facts that you think are interesting. But when it comes time to prepare your paper, either you don't know how to utilize that information, like how to actually pull information from that paper, or you don't know how to evaluate whether or not that particular study that's described actually meets your needs. So, this presentation is all about how to begin the process of writing a article review. Later on, we can get into writing cumulative summaries. That's where you synthesize information found in a lot of different sources. But for the purpose of this discussion, we're only going to talk about how to summarize a journal article for the purpose of supporting whatever your initiative is. So let's say that you're writing a grant and they're asking you, what is your theoretical foundation? Or what other studies or what other projects, initiatives have you looked at and decided that you want to model your particular program after? So, the first thing we want to do is we want to decide what is our interest or what aspect of a particular issue do we wish to address. So, just for example, it could be about obesity, childhood obesity. That could be a problem, or that could be an interest of yours. But then, what is your perspective, or what is the assumption that you are making? And this assumption and this perspective that I'm referring to is based on your approach. So let's say that your program is designed to teach them how to track their snack intake. So maybe your program is one that utilizes an app. So you think that because kids are plugged into their computers at all times, you can utilize this interest and this technology to get them to make decisions regarding their snack choices. So that's an example. Or in the case of the study that I'm going to use as an example, there was some belief that there would be differences in how one group responded to a public health or health education initiative versus another. And then it looked at the different methods that were used to reach each group. So, also, too, when you're trying to find data that supports your assumption or your perspective, you have to ask yourself, is your perspective in agreement with what's already been done? And maybe you just want to tweak a small part? Or is this approach that you plan to employ novel and it's never been done before? Or let's say it's never been done in this particular population. Like I worked on a study one time where we were looking at a medication that had an indication by the FDA for schizophrenic patients. But in this particular study, we wanted to see if we could get the same positive results in a aggressive self-injurious autistic population. So basically we were attempting an investigation to see if we could get a new indication or get approved for a new use of that particular already approved drug. So Once you identify your articles, then you have to get into the quality of the article. And this will vary. A lot of times when you're working on college level papers, they will require you to utilize peer review journals. So these are journals that have already been stress tests. The people who participate in reviewing the articles and the data before it's published are well respected within their field. These individuals offer comment to the investigators and give the investigators an opportunity to respond. So it's basically the information presented has been scrutinized. And so, in most academic institutions, it's accepted if the journal is a widely respected journal. But that's not to say that you can't conduct your own research and your own research be as valid. But that's a different discussion. When you look at these articles, most of them start with an abstract. You can get a lot of information from the title. From the title, you can probably obtain if a drug was used. You can determine if it was conducted in an urban setting, if your work is going to be done in an urban setting. You can determine if it was a study of retrospective data, so data that wasn't collected as part of a study, but now it was analyzed as part of this new investigation. So you can get a lot of information from the title and abstract. But I mention those because a lot of times I notice that students or business owners who are submitting a proposal, they may just look at the blurb and want to cut and paste information from that. But as you will find out later, the abstract does not always provide the complete picture of what occurred. And so it's good to use the abstract and title to maybe find an article, but you cannot write an article review with the information obtained in an abstract alone. And then the last point that I want to make regarding selecting your topic is to determine whether or not the article that you're reading describes an intervention or if it describes an observational study. So, interventions can be prospective and they're usually tailored to evaluate the direct impacts of treatment or preventative measures on a disease. So, in these types of studies, it's an experiment. The investigator starts with an idea, they have a solution in mind, they design a protocol or a series of events and measures where they can determine if the stimuli or whatever the thing on the investigation, whether it's a drug or it's an activity or it's a form of counseling or it's a diet, whatever that thing is, in an intervention, we are trying to determine the impact that that thing has on behavior, a health outcome, a mindset, an attitude, a practice. And typically, these studies are designed in what they call randomized control. So that means that, let's say you have two or more groups, and they're all randomly assigned to different study groups. So maybe one group is receiving one drug, another group is receiving two drugs, another group is receiving drug A and health education. I'm just trying to give you an examples that each of these groups in a randomized control situation will be subjected to different types of stimuli, but let's say that the outcome measurements will be the same. So if it's a behavioral measure, like if we're trying to see if this drug has an impact on behavior, that will be the same for all study groups. But the thing that we're administering to create an effect might be different for each group. And then the other type of study would be considered observational. So that's when the researchers don't attempt to affect any aspect of the investigation. They basically want to just observe what happens. So, so I have some examples of that as well. So interventions typically involve 2 or 3 study groups, as I stated. Participants are assigned to the groups um, based on a criteria or randomly. Participants follow a study group specific protocol, and then the program continues for a set amount of time. So an intervention will always be, 6 months, 2 weeks, a weekend. There's always a specific amount of time that each person is exposed to that experimental treatment. Observational studies, when I think of those, I think of cohort studies. So a cohort could actually be a group of people that have a shared criteria or something like that. People born within the same amount of time, people who lived in the projects in 1983 during it's a very specific group of people, and you're going to compare them to a group of people who didn't experience that thing, but are similar in terms of maybe age, race, marital status, or something like that. And then another type of observational study would be a focus group. You're just going to bring people together, you're going to ask them questions, and you're going to let people um, answer freely. They're going to be open-ended questions. And then you will have to go back later and decide what to do with that information. And then the last would be some sort of case control study. If there was reports of something that occurred at a mental institution in the 1960s, maybe you would go back and get the medical records. You would basically build a case based on the available information. You wouldn't be subjecting the participants to anything because their participation would have been years ago. So you're just going to make observations about what you see. So I just wanted to post an example of an article. Now, this is what you typically see when you open up something that is a peer-reviewed journal online. It'll tell you the name of the journal, and that's important because when it comes time to do your reference list, you want to make sure that you are referring back to the original article to create the reference for your particular paper. Because sometimes an article can be mentioned in another article, but it doesn't provide all the pertinent information that's necessary to be compliant with, let's say, APA style. And that's typically the style that teachers want any type of college reference list. They want you to put it in APA style. So as you see, the abstract offers you the author's name, when it was published, the background information, methods, and then gives you a brief overview of the results. Now, you would never cut and paste an abstract. And in this day and time, a lot of teachers have software where they can look for plagiarism. And it's just a certain way that students write that a teacher can, after they read your writing one time, they can always tell whether or not it's you who is writing this or if you're basically cutting and pasting. So I just want to point out that to you that you should. I know it can be daunting when you have to do 15 article reviews, but you really have to pace yourself and read the articles until you become skilled at how to go through the articles and just highlight the pertinent information and then summarize that. So, like me, I typically go through articles and I highlight the specific pieces of information that I want to go into my paragraph. So when I create an article review, I use a 3 paragraph format. So in my paragraph 1, I am aiming to, well, first, I'm going to take the article, I'm going to look for the who. So who's doing the study? The what, like what is the study? The when did the study occur? When the study occurred is not the same as when the article was published. I just want to point that out. And the where and why in this particular article were, I combined them into one sentence. And as you can see, I color coded to kind of make it a little bit easier for you to see. So the who is the authors. The where and why was, this study wanted to evaluate the effectiveness of the government's activities to control and prevent cholera. The what is what was the intervention, like what was done as part of the study that the article described. And so social workers interviewed 132 heads of household, age 17 and older, administered a cap of cholera survey. Now, I want to point out something to you. You see, it says interviewed 132 female heads of household. But if you look at the article, it says we surveyed 67 urban and 61 rural household. And then if you go down to the results, it says 25% of 482 urban and 11% of 454 rural household members. So I just want to point out to you, this study looked at families. So if you notice in the result number, the numbers are much larger because they're just trying to let you know that this study had a total number of participants, totaling in the thousands. But for the purposes of explanation, I have chose to only talk about the individuals who provided the information. And I'm only pointing that out because you can always make these article reviews complicated or simple. So for me, I chose to focus on who provided the information because the point that I wanted to make wasn't related to how families responded to the survey. Um, and so I just want you to know that sometimes when you read these article reviews, it can provide a lot of information, and you have to train yourself to understand the information that is presenting. So you might have had 90 people who responded, but there might have been thousands of participants because one household member responded for the whole family. Okay, so go back for a second. So I had the when and why, and then the when, if you notice, even though this article was published in 96, the data was collected between June and July 1991. So you want to just make sure that you read the article, not just the abstract, to extract the who, what, when, where, and why. In your second paragraph, or in the second paragraph, the way that I'm advising students to create these, students, business owners to create these, or even like, so a business owner wouldn't necessarily be writing a paper. A business owner might be trying to extract statistics that support working with a particular group. So I noticed that a lot of business owners will be looking at like demographic data, income, educational levels, and things like that. And so you would present those findings different because you wouldn't necessarily be expected to state whether or not it's statistically significant. But you should understand whether a result is statistically significant, because why present something that actually means nothing? And someone who is in that field or knowledgeable about the like where the field is will know immediately that you're just adding fluff. So if you are a business owner and you're creating a proposal and you are trying to gain support for your premise based on stats, make sure that the stats are relevant. So in this section, typically when you're in college, mainly graduate school. So in undergrad, they don't really require you to explain statistics in the same way that it's required in grad school. But I've learned that, just because you don't know the statistical formula, doesn't mean that you should be afraid of statistics. Um, Google is awesome. You can literally Google a particular test and it will tell you what that test measures. And the more you read it, the more you understand. Okay, that means that this particular factor is the main driver of the high score. So people that have this characteristic um, explain why there's such a high number of this. So, like for instance, in a neighborhood, you might have a neighborhood where the median income is $150,000, and you're looking around the neighborhood and you're like, that can't be true. How is that possible? Well, in your neighborhood, you probably have some sort of outlier. Maybe you have a couple millionaires that live in your neighborhood that you just don't even know about, and so their income kind of skews the number for the whole area. And so in this one, in this particular article review, I was trying to look for statistical significance in the results that I presented. And in this section, you should just present the significant results. Like, I would not get into explaining why the authors chose a particular test unless you are presenting these particular findings because these are the tests that you're trying to justify using. So, like I said, in grad school, you're only going to present findings that are statistically significant. And you need to go back to what is your perspective on a thing. You would not be presenting statistics that say that computer games don't aid with weight loss if your program is geared towards using some sort of AI or app to encourage healthier choices when it comes to food. So that's not to say that you're only picking stats that support your premise, but maybe you should be reviewing peer-reviewed literature to determine if someone else has already determined that your approach won't work. So that's something to keep in mind. So paragraph 2, results only. And then the last paragraph is where you summarize the author's findings. This is not so in undergrad, perhaps you will offer your own personal opinion. Not that that is correct, but I've noticed that teachers don't really correct students as much. Like they don't make a big deal of when students interject their own opinions into the conclusion sections of an article review. But in graduate school, that is not what they are expecting from you. They are expecting you to just present the findings of the article, and it's very important that whoever your teacher is, you have to read the syllabus. I remember when I was in school, I didn't think the syllabus was that important, but once I started working with students, I realized how the syllabus really is a bible for how to successfully complete a course. You have some teachers that are very strict about um, certain aspects of a paper, that certain things that they expect, it's a requirement. Your grade will be deeply affected if you don't follow the rule. So um this is also one of those areas where you have to become an expert at how to diversify your speech patterns. You need to figure out different ways to basically say the same thing. So in this particular conclusion section, because like I had a teacher tell me once that in undergrad you know nothing. And in graduate school, you only know what others have said. And it's not until you reach the PhD level that because you've done your own research that you can actually make definitive statements about things. So I'm kind of working on this from a perspective of a graduate student. It's none of these sentences in the conclusion are my own. They're all of the author. And so, Quick and colleagues, the authors, the researchers, Quick et al. You see, I'm starting each sentence with a different way to refer to the authors. And I'm sure there's probably a much better way to do it. But for the purpose of this discussion, I just wanted to give you some examples of things to pay attention to. And then the last is the APA style. It changes. I think back from when I was in undergrad to when I was in graduate school, there was a huge gap in between, and APA style even changed in that period of time because the internet has become so much more of a reputable source of information. At one time, it was kind of sketchy. And even if you did retrieve the article from the net, you still would want to go back to referencing it as if it came out of a journal, a published journal. So times have changed and we adjust. So, yes. So, this is just a brief overview of writing a research review for a peer reviewed journal. I am available for coaching. I primarily work with graduate students, but undergrad, I am happy to get you on a path to start looking at the big picture when it comes to writing these assignments. I know sometimes we just think of it like, oh gosh, it's just school, but this is your career. So don't waste your time. Make sure that your papers focus on things that actually interest you. Read articles that are actually relevant to your career path. And then that way it won't feel like it's just a drag. So, anywho, until next time, my name is Courtney Wheeler. And yeah, this again was writing research articles, choosing your topic.